5, 4, 3, 2.
Hi, and welcome to Exploring Hobbies. My name is Randy Nunez, and today we're going to talk about model railroading. And our guests today are Joe Watts and Clayton Sarin. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
So, we use the term model railroading. How is that different from just playing around with trains? Joe?
Well, playing with trains basically is you can have a lot of fun with a loop of track and one train and just run it forever, round and round and round. We have some folks in our club down in Blissfield that run it around a bigger circle, but they still basically just like to run trains. Model railroading goes quite a bit farther than that. It involves building trains, building scenery for a railroad, wiring the electrical system for a model railroad. All of those require skills that you learn when you become a model railroader, and that's usually the process. Over a period of years, you learn a lot of these skills, and it takes quite a while sometimes to learn skills like that. But you get involved to where you're really interested in not only watching a train go around the loop, but why does it go around the loop, and what happens when it quits, and knowing what to do to fix it, and that kind of thing. So it's quite a big thing when you learn all those skills. It's quite a skill set, and it's something that becomes a hobby. You know, you enjoy doing it. I've been model railroading for a long time, and I've enjoyed it over and over again. But my emphasis has sort of backed off the train running business a lot and has gotten more into what's going on under the railroad. You know, what happens when, you know, how do I troubleshoot when everything stops and everybody else pulls their hair out, and I usually climb under the railroad and see what's going on. So it's a different attitude really about trains.
So, I've seen some of these that are very elaborate setups with tracks that go all kinds of different places and landscaping that is just ultimately a reproduction of something else. Do you actually target a certain railroad type and try to model the scenery after that?
Yes, usually if you build especially a big railroad like ours, you decide, okay, what are we going to model? Are we going to take a particular railroad or a section of a railroad and then try to model it as accurately as we can? Or are we going to just have one in general? You know, we're going to talk steam engines, for example, in an era that was maybe the 30s, 40s, 50s, long in there. Or are we going to run diesels as well, diesel locomotives? You might want to spread that, but so you have both operating. This is sort of what we do. We have both steam engines and diesels operating, and it's a period from like 55 to 1975. Other railroads will narrow it down a lot more than that and have a specific time, like August the 1st, 1942 or something like that. And then everything is modeled on the basis of what was happening in that date. And it's a matter of how much detail you want to get into, is how you do it. But yes, we try to model a lot of very specific things. Part of our railroad represents the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad between Cincinnati and Charleston, West Virginia. And in that area you run through, one of the cities you run through is Huntington, West Virginia. And we're trying to model the downtown area of Huntington, West Virginia with its station and some underpasses that go under the railroad, the kinds of buildings that we could see in that area at that time period. And it's quite fun to try to simulate that the best you can. We've even had an old gentleman visited us one day who was from Huntington. We didn't know it until he walked up and was examining this city, you know. And he told us, I'm from Huntington, you guys have got it pretty close. You know, he was talking about the way the location of the underpasses and the depot and all that sort of thing. He said, yeah, it's pretty close. And we were thrilled with that because we had no idea that we were doing it that well. But, and it doesn't need to be that specific. Some guys don't bother with that. They try to maybe model an era, but not necessarily a geographical location. It's sort of you make your own choice when you do that, and that's just freedom that you have when you're a model railroader. You can decide what you want to do and do it.
So Joe, how did you get started in model railroading?
Well, I was from a railroad family, so I knew a lot about railroads as a little kid. My grandfather and my father, about 4 uncles and a cousin, were all railroaders. So I hardly heard anything but railroads being discussed as a kid. I guess I really got interested in model railroading when my folks bought me a regular Lionel train back in the 027 gauge, I think it was, back in about 1948. And it was on a 4x8 sheet of plywood, one loop of track with a couple of switches, and I ran it until it literally fell apart. I mean, just wore it out. By the time I was 12 or to 13, somewhere in there, I had gotten interested in other things and in school and all that, and it took less of my attention. And I honestly don't even know whatever happened to it. But when I got into school, I went completely through school, through high school and college, and I was never back into it again until my first job. I was in California, and some fellows that I worked with asked me if I was interested in being in a model railroad club. And I said, well, I might. So I went with them and visited with them at their club and got interested in it. It was an HO scale. And I bought a few locomotives and that sort of thing, and operated with them for 4 or 5 years. And then I got married, started a family, and I didn't have any time anymore for model railroading. So 25 years went by, and then I got back into it again. When I was almost ready to retire, I joined another club when I was living in Virginia at that time. And that's where I really began to learn a lot of skills as a model railroader. And I started out with mostly electrical wiring and that sort of thing, and got into specifically what kind of trains I wanted to build, own, and run, and that sort of thing. And then we moved to Michigan in 2001, and I joined the Blissfield Model Railroad Club, and I've been loving it ever since. So, but I was in and out of it several times as a younger person.
Interesting. So Clayton, you're of a little different generation than Joe, but you've found your way through the high technology community, but you're interested in model railroading. Tell me how you got started.
I got started. I've always liked trains since I was real little. I liked Thomas the Train. I watched it on TV and all that. And my family just was real good at supporting it. They took me to see Thomas when he was somewhere nearby to ride him. And we went to Greenfield Village, which has a big train set up and things like that. And I've always liked that. I always had a little loop of track, kind of like how he was explaining, just a loop of track. It wasn't real in depth or anything, but I liked that. And when I got in high school, I found the Blissfield Model Railroad Club. And that was really useful because it provided a big model railroad to come and play on, but I didn't have to necessarily go through the process of constructing my own layout. So it was real helpful for getting my feet wet in it without having to make a big investment.
Okay. So Joe, if you're interested, or if someone's interested in getting into model railroading, but they're not quite sure where to start, how would you recommend an approach to get started?
Well, it's you almost have to own a train of some kind to get interested, and but that's just getting a start, One thing it's helpful in getting familiar with all the aspects of model railroading is to buy a model railroading magazine. There are several of those around. There's Model Railroader and the Model Railroad Craftsman are two very good ones that a lot of people read. But each issue, each month, they have some new plan, something they're building or a layout that they're building, and they go through it step by step and show you this is how you start, this is how you finish it, and so you can model what you do after some of these layouts that they do in magazines. That's a good way to start. Generally, you want to decide, well, how far will I go? How big a layout do I want to build? How much room have I got? That is a major issue, by the way. I never did have, my whole life, I never had enough room at home to build a very big layout. And I'll show you here, these boxcars, this happens to be a locomotive. This is N scale, which is the smallest scale I would ever try to build anything with. But you can see how that compares to HO scale and O scale, and then this is a Garden Railway G scale.
Very large.
Very large, yes. HO is the scale we have had at the two clubs that I belong to. And that's sort of a good happy medium. It doesn't take a lot of room, and yet you can build it's easy to work on, for one thing. When you get to N scale, somebody my age has difficulty even seeing the thing,
Yeah,
let
I'm
alone
surprised
working on it.
that's even a real train. Looks
Yes.
more like a toy,
That's right.
but
That's
these
right.
actually run as well or better than HO and these other scales.
Yes, they do now. Years ago, when they first started building in scale, they didn't operate as well. You had I had a lot of trouble. I've tried them before, and you had a lot of trouble with derailments and that sort of thing. And they've really improved them in recent years. So yes, you can get reliability with either scale. But HO scale is the one that I've mostly been involved with, and but that's one of the things you need to decide is how much room have I got, and if you want to build a reasonable layout, with a lot of detail, and you don't have much room, then N scale is one way to go.
Okay.
And if you do have like a basement or something that's bigger that you have more room to spread out, then HO would be my other recommendation. Anything bigger, even O scale, takes a lot more room. I always felt that HO scale was more realistic too, because when you put a curve in a railroad, you can make a more gentle curve, more like the real thing with HO than you ever could with O scale. Most people are familiar with O scale. It's pretty much an L turn. They jog around the corner, and it doesn't look very realistic. Now you can be made to do that if you have enough room. You can make wider curves there too. But that's what we're used to seeing. That's the way my old Lionel was, it's just jogging itself around this small 4x8 sheet of plywood, and it had to make some pretty sharp turns to do that. But anyway, when you decide on what size you can handle, then it's a matter of, okay, do it in stages. If you're going to go build a giant layout in your basement, you'd want to plan it. Lay out a drawing, to scale drawing if you can, so you don't build yourself into a corner and find out you can't get out of the corner. You need to lay it out and do the best you can to lay out a scale drawing of it that you want to build, and then where you want to put industries. A little thinking ahead of time is a big help. If you just start laying track, you're going to lay yourself into a corner somewhere, certainly. That's one thing that was done with our big club layout. A lot of planning went into it. And they had some unique characteristics that they never could have done if they hadn't been doing it on paper, on scale. We built a big classification yard in that. The last thing we built, as a matter of fact, in that layout. And I found an online design tool that you could lay the yard out, put the switches where they need to go, and it wouldn't let you put a switch where it wouldn't fit. And so it was sort of like, it's going to make you do it right. And that's what we used to design that yard, and it worked out very well. We were able to build it just about exactly the way it was on paper. So that's a big help to start, to be sure you know where you're going with it, and the way to do that is to put it on paper. And then, of course, cost always comes into it.
So speaking of cost, Clayton, how expensive is this hobby, and what kind of components do you need to get started, and what kind of cost can you expect? So obviously you need a train, obviously you need a track, but there's some other things you need as well.
And it's all about how much you want to make it. You can buy a basic set with HO scale and just have a short oval track, an engine, 2 or 3 cars, and you get that in a pack for maybe $200. And that's a real simple starter set. You can only run one train at a time. That gets you control pack, the train cars, and just the track.
So the control pack is what provides the
power
to the track?
For the track, yes.
Is that AC or DC? Or?
It is usually DC.
DC, okay.
And there's 2 kinds of power packs. There's DC, which is what would come in a starter set. And with that, you can only run one train at a time. Okay. If you had DCC, you can run multiple trains at a time. You can program each locomotive to have an ID card that it would recognize in a computer chip. And then you could start multiple trains or have some stop and some go like you'd need on a big layout. But that's all part of just making it what you want it to be. A DCC layout to run multiple trains will be more expensive than just running one train. And depending on how detailed you want to get into it, if you want to have buildings and scenery and all that, that's going to cost a lot more.
Do you buy these or do you build them yourself?
You can do it either way. You can buy train cars and buildings put together already, and those will be more expensive. You could buy kits where you have to put them together yourself, and those will be generally cheaper. A kit for a railroad car like this might be $15, depending on what you want. One already put together might be $30.
So the scenery and the mountains and all that, it's a combination of do-it-yourself all the way to prepackaged, you can buy it, but then there's a cost component in all those.
Some scenery can be fairly inexpensive. For instance, if you're putting mountains, on your layout, you can usually build those out of foam. This foam insulation you buy, this blue foam about this thick. You can stack that and then shear it off to make it the shape that you want, and fill it in with plaster and that sort of thing. And those things aren't expensive, compared to buying, a mountain, already built or something like that. And it's easy to do. That's something you just kind of wade in and do it until you learn how to do it right. You make a few messes, but in the process, you learn how to do it. The club, as a matter of fact, makes trees, HO scale trees, by the hundreds, and we sell them a lot of times at train shows. A lot of people buy them and put them on their layouts. Really? And we learned how to do that. We found materials that we can use. In fact, we import what's called pepper grass from the state of Michigan, or the state of Washington, and we make the trees here in Michigan, and then we sell them wherever we can sell them. But that's an example of a kind of scenery that really adds to a railroad. If you do have mountain scenery, you got to have trees. And if you buy them 3 at a time, on the shelf, it's very expensive. And we sell these trees that we make for $1 a piece, and we get for a large quantity, we give a discount even from that. But so anyway, that's there's all kinds of scenery. And one of the interesting things about the cost is the more you get down into the detailed scenery of little people and cars and things like that, the higher the price goes. They're very expensive, and so the closer you get to the end of building your railroad, and adding detail, the higher the cost goes. So you just have to decide what you can afford and take it that far, and don't worry about it.
So Clayton, what do you enjoy most about model railroading?
I enjoyed just running the trains, and with our club, we have the ability to run it in a real-life operation as if it was a real railroad. So it's not just running the train around in a circle. The trains are actually picking up cars and dropping cars off as a real railroad would. And I think it's very interesting to be able to see how it all works and how it all plays out, and to see how a real railroad would work in a small environment.
So Joe, what do you like best about model railroading?
Well, I fall in the same general category. That's one thing that Clayton and I are very good to get together on, is operating. That is one of the big differences between running trains and having a model railroad is if you can design the railroad so that you can operate it like a real railroad. In other words, a train, usually when we have an operating session, we have yard masters and a dispatcher and engineers.
So literally you have roles just like a real railroad would
have. That's right. That's right. And it usually, like for example, if we have a local freight train that's going to go out, leave the classification yard and make a run out to some little town somewhere and switch the industries in that town and then come back, it has a 2-man crew. You have an engineer. His job is to keep radio contact with the dispatcher, watch the signals, and get permission to go where you need to go to do your switching. The conductor's job is to keep track of the cars that you're switching. And each of our cars has a car card, they call it, which the card itself tells you it gives the number, even has a picture of the car on it. And then there's a slot in the card that the waybill goes in. The waybill tells you what's in the car and where it's going. So this information is each car has one of these sets of card and waybill. So if you take a 20-car train out, and you've got 20 waybills to deal with. So the conductor's job is to keep those sorted. And when he goes into a town, he knows what cars come out of the town, what cars go in, and he shuffles the waybills, leaves the ones there where the cars that he leaves, and then he gets waybills from that town and brings them with him back to the yard when he takes the train back. So it's a job that keeps both these guys busy. And when we have an operating session, as opposed to when we're running trains and loops, you can hear a pin drop. Everybody is so busy paying attention to what they're doing that it's a totally different atmosphere than when we're just looping trains,
Well, it sounds like a lot of work, but I guess like many hobbies, it is a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, but it becomes a lot of fun, and that makes it worthwhile.
Okay. So, and Clayton mentioned DTC. How's the model railroading technology evolved over time? I'm assuming there's a lot more technology now than there was 30,
Oh
40
yeah.
years ago.
Clayton mentioned DCC. That's
so-
digital command control.
Okay.
And what that means is computers are involved. And to start with, each locomotive has a little computer chip about that big that is wired into it. Some you can buy them already installed, or you can buy the chip itself and install it in an older locomotive that doesn't have one. But once you have that installed, it's wired into the motor and into the pickup system in the locomotive. You then communicate with that locomotive. On the old DC, the regular old DC like Lionel, you basically vary the voltage on the track.
Right.
And as you do so, it picks up more power and goes faster, you know. And in DCC, that's not true. You're basically maintaining about 15 volts on the track at all times.
Right.
But what you're doing is you're communicating with that locomotive through the track. You're wired into a system between the controller that we have. It contacts the controller in our back room, you know, the main brains of the system.
Okay.
And it then contacts the locomotive through the track. Instead of being straight DC power, you know, direct current, it's a sort of like alternating current, but it's a square wave, and it's used to code the message that you're sending.
Digital,
yes,
like you said.
And you crank up the throttle to make it go faster, and the computer tells it, okay, crank up, and the chip that's in the locomotive then turns up the voltage to the motor.
So each engine is powered in and of itself, and
That's
it
right.
adjusts its own power
Yes.
rather than grabbing the power from the track.
It grabs the power from the track,
Okay.
but only as much as you tell it to.
Oh, I see.
And the track is still the source of the power, but it's always at the same voltage, and it uses as much as your chip allows it to do, and that's varied by your controller. So, and there's a lot of variations on that. The ones that we operate are radio controlled. The controller you have in your hand sends a signal to a radio receiver, which then goes into the what we call the LocoNet, and that goes into the computer and then out through the track to the locomotive, and you can have as many as a dozen of them, or even more than that, communicating at the same time. It's all whipping back and forth.
These are all
rapidly.
wireless controllers.
All wireless, yeah.
They're walking around.
Yeah.
You don't have to be tethered anymore.
That's
by
right.
wire.
And the capacity, though, of the system is enough that you can have all these trains being individually controlled at the same time. So one train is one local that goes out to switch. It's communicating, doing its thing, and meanwhile a passenger train comes roaring through the other way with another engineer and another engine, and it has an address on the locomotive that is being communicated with by a totally different guy.
How do you keep all the trains straight? Are they on different tracks, or?
Well, that's a problem that the dispatcher has.
Oh, yet another role in the,
yes,
in the train.
We have a remote control of most of the switches and the signals on the railroad, and so if this local is going to go out and switch at Bluffton or somewhere, the dispatcher will line him up and give him the switches he needs and the green signals all the way to Bluffton. When he gets out there to switch, he'll basically allow him to switch manually the switches in that area to do what he needs to do. And while he's in there, the dispatcher gives a red signal to trains coming from either direction.
Just like a real railroad.
That's right. He's protected while he's working. Or he can tell him to get off the main line and let a passenger train or something go through. So yes, it's as close to what the real thing is as we can make it. And there's always limitations, of course, but I mean, we can have a train wreck and nobody gets killed, you know.
That's good.
But at least, but you try like mad to make it work right. Even how fast you run your locomotive. You do it at scale speed as much as you can. Most freight trains, you know, around the mountains hardly ever get over 30 or 40 miles an hour. And passenger trains don't get a whole lot higher than that, depending on curves and that kind of thing. But everything you do, including the dispatcher's role, handling waybills or whatever it is as near the real thing as you can make it. And that makes it, to me, it makes it a lot of fun. And we have quite a few guys in the club that enjoy operating. Clayton is one of the ones that enjoys it the most, I think.
So Clayton, where can people go to find out more information on model railroading?
There's a variety of places. Our Model Railroad Club, for one, we have a website. Do you know what it is off the top of your head?
It's www.blissfield, it's BLISSFILD, MRC.org.
So Blissfield MRC, one word, .org. Okay.
You can go on there, and that's all sorts of information about our club. how you can join and get involved. But there's tons of sources out there. Model Railroader magazine is one very good source.
Now, are these physical magazines
it's a
or
physical
are these virtual
physical magazines? Yes,
They're
and
physical, still physical?
and
these days?
there's online ones. There's a
Oh, there's
ton,
online
there's
ones
a
as well.
ton of them out there.
All right.
But Model Railroader is a
Model
big
Railroader,
one, and that can get you started in the hobby and just give you a head start in all the areas, from track to working on buildings to DC versus DCC and how it works and all that. But I would recommend a publication to get started.
You mentioned online. There is one particular one I can think of is Model Railroad Hobbyist. That is online only, and it's free. That's
Really?
another nice thing about it. So it's easy to deal with that, you know. And if you're on a computer a lot, why it's easy to get information from that one.
So, Clayton, where do you buy this equipment? It looks like a lot of the hobby stores have closed up in favor of a lot of online.
A lot of it
companies.
is online now. There's still a few hobby stores, and I prefer to go to a hobby store because you can look at it, you know, hold it in your hand, figure out if that's what you want, or if you want something else. But a lot of it is online now.
Online today.
Online ordering and shipping.
Okay.
There's another possibility, and that is we do have train shows, they call
Train
them.
shows?
What they really are railroad flea markets. They have dealers that come into one particular spot. In fact, you just had one in Novi not too long ago. And we have one in Monroe the end of this month. We'll have some others around the area in the spring. But those train shows, as they call them, are basically trade shows, and these dealers sell all kinds of railroad equipment, and it's specifically railroad. It isn't a hobby thing. It's just railroad equipment. And usually you get a better price there. Almost always you can save money by buying your equipment at a train show. So that's something to keep your eyes open for if you're interested in buying equipment.
So, assuming there are also organizations other than yours, maybe the United States or in other countries that have the model railroading enthusiasts join them. Are there any big names, any kind of U.S.-based ones, if you will, versus local? How does that work?
There's a number of them out there. You'd probably know more of the specifics on the names.
Well, one is the NMRA,
Okay.
the National Model Railroader Association. That is like a national club that you can join. They have a convention every year. They have a magazine. You can learn from that too. That's another possibility. And a lot of individuals are members of the NMRA. I don't happen to be, but there are a number that I know who are. And they have divisions. They have different organizations within a state, for example. They've got a number of different divisions around the area. And usually they have meetings, and sometimes they even have layouts and that sort of thing.
So they have local chapters, if you will? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay.
That's the only thing I can think of is NMRA there. I'm sure there are others. You know, they have individual clubs like ours, but then they have these bigger organizations that are, you know, they try to follow the policies and all that of the NMRA, and they try to provide help to model railroaders, you know, in learning the hobby. That's one of the things that they try to do.
Do most people just join more of a local club?
Usually, yeah. Sometimes they join a local unit of the NMRA, like they call them a division, you know, which is you'd find several around the Detroit area, I think. But anyway, it's one real good way to learn is to be a part of a club that meets regularly, that has a layout, and that is building it where you can get in the middle of it and learn the skills that you need as a model railroader.
Great. Well, we're about out of time. I'd like to thank Joe Watts and Clayton Sarin for imparting their information about model railroading. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for another episode of Exploring Hobbies.